Hello and welcome to Lunchtime Politics, reaching you live from our global headquarters here in the nation's commercial nerve center, Lagos. I'm Jeffrey Uzoma. Let's bring you up to speed with the big stories we're tracking in the polity. House of Representatives calls for the immediate suspension of tariff hike by telecommunications companies following complaints that greeted the implementation of the cost for data and calls. ABIA State Working Committee of the People's Democratic Party suspends the chairman of the party's board of trustees, Senator Adolphus Nwabara, over alleged anti-party activities. The NWC voids that suspension. And latest corruption perceptions index by Transparency International scores Nigeria 26 over 100, placing it as the 36th most corrupt country globally, alongside Uganda, Mexico, Iraq, and others. It's your all-access pass to what's going on in politics and in the polity at midday. Thanks again for joining us on the program. Let's get started with the leadership of the People's Democratic Party in Abia State and what is playing out there, as it has suspended the chairman of the party's board of trustees and former Senate President Adolphus Nwabara for 1 month over alleged anti-party activities. The decision was taken at a meeting of members of the State Working Committee and State Executive Committee presided over by the State Chairman of the party, Abraham Ama, at the party secretariat in Umuahia. Reading out the statement on the outcome of the meeting, Mr. Ama also announced that in the interim, Senator Nwabara has ceased to be the chairman of the BOT, adding that the decision has been communicated to the National Working Committee of the party. They claim that in 2023, October, Senator Nwabara, through his speech at a function, publicly endorsed the current governor of Abia State, Alex Otti, for a second term.
In line with the provisions of the PDP Constitution 2017 as amended, and after careful deliberations, the State Working Committee SWC and the State Executive Committee SEC have unanimously resolved to suspend Senator Adolphus Nwabara from the party. Reasons for the suspension: 1. Breach of party loyalty. In October 2023, Senator Adolphus Nwabara publicly endorsed the governor of Abia State, Dr. Alex Otti of the Labour Party, for a second term in office, barely 5 months after his inauguration. These endorsements, widely circulated in national dailies and on social media, constitutes a flagrant act of sabotage against the People's Democratic Party.
Meanwhile, the National Working Committee of the People's Democratic Party has voided that suspension of the chairman of the Board of Trustees, Senator Adolphus Nwabara. In a statement on Tuesday, the National Publicity Secretary of the party, Debo Ologunagba, said the purported suspension violated the PDP Constitution as amended in 2017 and does not follow due process. He described the action as reckless and unconstitutional act after the Abia State chapter of the party suspended Nwabara for allegedly endorsing Senator Alex Otti for a second tenure, barely 5 months into the governor's administration in October 2023. The PDP NWC condemns the purported suspension of Senator Nwabara and cautioned those behind the act to retrace their steps, else the party would take appropriate disciplinary actions to preserve the stability of the party and the sanctity of its constitution. Apparently, interesting days ahead in the party, the PDP. Let's head to the National Assembly in the lower chambers. The House of Representatives is calling for the immediate suspension of the proposed hike in telecoms tariff. The House is also concerned about the poor service delivery from telecom operators and calls for improved service delivery before the increase can happen. In the meantime, a bill for an act to make provisions for a regulatory body for organ harvesting, transplant and donation has scaled second reading in the House. Our correspondent Tariff has a report.
Guys have it. The first plenary session of the week in the Green Chamber witnesses a defection by Honorable Amos Magaji from Kaduna State, from the main opposition PDP to the ruling APC.
Dr. Amos Gomna Magaji has emphatically declared that he will be joining, or he has already joined, the All Progressive Congress Party.
His defection is well received by the APC, but contested by the opposition, in line with what has become a tradition with parliamentary defections.
Congrats.
As the House settles down for the business of the day, a motion of urgent national importance is raised, calling for suspension of the proposed hike in Telecoms tariff.
It is imperative that the telecommunication company have improved, on their service delivery, poor network, which Nigeria have been yearning for in years before embarking on the increase in tariff.
A brief debate for and against the motion ensues, and it is eventually adopted.
The last increase was done over a decade, over 10 years. And for somebody like I did say, coming from private sector, how do we expect them to increase their performance? Knowing that prices of virtually all the various indices have increased.
We are not saying tariff should not be brought in, but not now. Let the telecom industry tell our people, let them show to us that what the people should be paying for is being given to them.
The House then considers a bill seeking to regulate organ transplant and donations. The bill scales second reading. Meanwhile, the newly established North Central Development Commission has continued to receive reactions.
We have other linking routes, from Kogi to Kwara to Niger. Once all these are put together, it will boost the economy of this region. It will increase the revenue of the region and even the nation Nigeria. And of course, looking at agriculture, because North Central region is known for agriculture.
A development commission has now been established in every region of the country, with the hope that regionalized development can truly occur as is expected in a democratic setting. Terry Ikumi, Channels Television News.
Well, the movement and realignment continues as we speak. Just moments ago, another lawmaker from Kebbi State, Salisu Koko, has also defected from the PDP to the All Progressives Congress. Interesting times in politics. The politicians, they keep moving. Anyway, let's move away from politics. I'm bringing my guest for a moment, but let me tell you, Nigeria has been ranked in the 140th position out of the 180 countries in the world on the 2024 Corruption Perceptions Index, according to a report by Transparency International. Transparency's latest ranking released sees Nigeria move up 5 spots when compared to the 2023 report, and 10 spots as against its report in 2020. Denmark emerged as the least corrupt country with 90 points, with fellow Nordic country Finland coming in second with 88 points, and Singapore the third position with 84 points. However, countries that made the most corrupt list in the world were South Sudan, Somalia, Venezuela, and others. No African country made the top 10 as it was dominated by European countries. Okay, let me bring in my guest, who is the right person to talk about all of this, because he's the CEO of Connected Development, as well as the founder of Follow the Money. So he has his eyes on where our money goes. Hamzat Lawal joins us from our Abuja studio. Mr. Lawal, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Well, thank you for having me. Good afternoon, Nigerians.
So when you look at the numbers, if you count from top, we're 140. If you count from bottom, we're 36th position, sharing places with Cameroon, Madagascar, Uganda, somewhere in between, Mexico around, all scoring 26 points over 100 points. So if you look at how we've come since 2022, what's your assessment?
I would say that we should continue in this trajectory. What this means is we're doing well. Yes, we're not there yet, but we're doing well. And again, this is not an assessment of anti-corruption agencies. This is assessment of public institutions that provide services to the Nigerian people, like the Nigerian Custom, the Nigerian Police, Nigerian Immigration, various ministries, departments, and agencies. So when you look at previous data or previous report and that of 2024, what this means is, we've gone up by 5%, and we can also take credit as civil society and even media with programs like the On Nigerian program that have invested a lot, to get civil society to ask the right questions and hold government to account. So, but then again, we should not relax, because if we relax, what will happen is there'll be a relapse of how we're faring. But again, it also provides an avenue to say, where are these gaps? Because these institutions and these perception reports that was brought out, so where is this gap? How can we do better as government? And I hope the government will respond positively to this report, to say that, even if this government is less than 2 years in office, they can also say maybe some of the reforms that they've done is now getting some positive reaction and positive feedback, particularly around immigration, led by the Minister for Interior and the person who heads the immigration agency. So how can we scale on all of these reforms? But most importantly, how can we get service delivery to the Nigerian people? How can we do away with corruption? And if you look at the report by the National Bureau of Statistics with UNODC, we've seen that even citizens are now rejecting corruption. We've seen that even citizens are saying, we would not give bribe, we would not participate in corrupt practices. And we've seen that the perceptions are changing. And hopefully it can change for better and will be among the top 10 in coming years.
So let's do a quick one on left and right. By that I mean, you mentioned them, some of them in passing, maybe highlighting them in bullet points if you can. What are we doing right in practical terms, and what are these gaps that we need to work on? So I'm asking, how do we consolidate to get better in practical terms, and what is the really the burning point that is eating up our feet?
So one thing we're doing right, we've seen for the first time, the president have said his ministers must sign a bond, which is being led by Madam Hadiza Bala Osman, who is a policy coordinator. We've also had the Minister for Information saying, they must organize town hall meetings and give a scorecard of what they've done vis-a-vis the bond they have signed. We've seen the Minister for Interior, for instance, who have led a reform around, closing up the bottleneck around passports when you engage immigration official. We've seen the Minister for Aviation, who is saying we don't need all of these security agencies when you're flying in or flying out of the country. These are kind of reforms that would send the perception that this government wants to fight corruption. But beyond that, we need to also, empower institutions like the audits, the Auditor General of the Federation, because every year he chunks out audits. He submitted to the National Assembly. We're hoping that the Public Account Committee would host a public hearing and bring some of these agencies of government that are found wanting. But let's give powers to the Auditor General of the Federation. That's a gap. Mr. President needs to sign the audits bill so that the Auditor General, beyond taking audit, would also have powers to prosecute so that we can recover assets. And speaking about recovery, I also know that the chairman of the Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences Commission, the West African region body that brings all the anti-corruption agencies together, he's chairing the work around recovery of assets. We've seen where our monies have moved, from Nigeria to offshore accounts and to safe havens, like we call them. How can we repatriate these resources? So again, these are some of the things we're doing well. And maybe we can get more government officials become more accountable, become more open. We have freedom of information law. Nigeria is a signatory to the Open Government Partnership. But most time you write freedom of information letter, you don't get response. At the national level or the federal level, we've seen some level of engagement and openness, and we've seen proactive disclosure. But at the subnational level, that's where, that's where we have the big elephant in the room. A lot of state governments would say, oh, it's a federal law, they don't have to respond to it. Some of them will respond and say, oh, they will not give you this information. We know the governors have immunity. But now with local government autonomy, and I think this also impacted, the corruption perception. Hopefully when resources now go to local government, and one thing we're doing is also to strengthen the capacity of local government officials, particularly also ensuring that they have transitional leadership in terms of local government elections and having this public officials really utilize resources when money moves from federation account directly to local government account?
Okay, let's talk about the one that I always like to talk about with you. That has to do with the budgeting process. Before we get to the budget core, one of the places we find, because we're talking about corruption in public service or in public service and all of the elements that the CPI looks at, issues around procurement and inflating figures, issues around kickbacks between government officials and the contractors. How do we begin to track? Because we're beginning to see from what we know and what we're reading and studying and analyzing that there are some institutional complicity that brings the kind of failure we're recording, because they say after God is government. So certain things cannot fly without somebody in the system. When we have systemic endemic issues, how do we begin to solve that problem? We had the ICPC man this morning now. That was a question I was asking him. How do we dismantle such that this institution, sometimes even the institution that is supposed to check graft, is in itself involved in graft? We've had EFCC suspend people to that effect. So those are my questions.
So first, I'm being practical. We must stop having strong men and women in the corridors of power. We need people with integrity. We need people with strong values. But beyond the people, the institution itself. So it's not about the people, but also the institution, because people would come and go, but these institutions would remain. So for instance, before you move money around, you need government. You also need private sector, because for government work, there must be open bidding, open contracting. And that's why I was saying, can we have an open contracting standard? And if civil society and the media are able to lay their hands to this information, then they can empower citizens. One, to even check what is the cost of this goods or service in the open market, and how much premium or how much profit has this private sector put to execute this contract. Because again, when you look at ICPC data in terms of even constituency project, in terms of abandonment of project and over inflation of this cost, and we all know practically that there's some negotiation behind closed doors. There's some exchange of money or exchange, of money between two hands, which are probably public officials and the private sector. But I think what's important is to agree on open contracting standard and reporting. So not just open contracting, but also reporting the standards. If we can agree as institutions of government, as civil society, as media, I think we can curb it. But most importantly, you need people with integrity in the corridors of power that would work with private institutions that would have strong internal governance mechanism that would refuse to give kickback, and it's really a complex situation, because when you look at contracting as a whole, again, that's the biggest elephant in the room, because 80% of corruption is contracts. In terms of the entire process, from bidding to open sorting to also awarding and execution. And in most cases, and I think that this is an opportunity also, because when you talk to contractors, for instance, they'll tell you they give you 15% mobilization. And before you get to this one, that's why when you look at our budget, you continue to see some recurrent expenditure under even capital expenditure for 5 or 10 years. And then you see a lot of time they say they have to do variation because of inflation or cost of goods and services or import duty, whatever the case may be. So the biggest elephant is contracting, but I believe if we agree on an open contracting standard, and I'm particularly excited about the work that PPDC is doing with Budeshi and Follow the Money is doing, with NomTrack, ensuring that whatever is being nominated in the budget, we can track with legislators. And I hope that the National Assembly would actually adopt and use this too, because their role is to provide oversight. If you have a National Assembly member as an institution using this tool to hold the executive to account, I believe that hopefully the next perception or Transparency International Perception Index, Nigeria would do better.
Let's get to that budget part, where you do the follow the money part. And what are you seeing? I have looked through some parts of the budget, and when I see the budget, although it's a bill right now, it's not yet an act, but we're seeing a lot of things. And even I was listening to some of the lawmakers even literally complaining that the repetition we see and the vagueness we see in some of these line items in the budget is just laughable and ludicrous. You see this over and over. They are buying spoon every day. They are buying cutleries every other day. In fact, I saw one, and because when we say we should cut costs, and I'm wondering why certain things are still in the budget. I think if I remember correctly, in the Ministry of Works, for instance, I saw that I think 2 billion or 2 or so billion was earmarked for cars for SSAs. I had to underline it and say at this time when we're looking for money. So if we look through other ministries, we're going to see a lot of things. So what are you seeing in this budget that you really frown at, that you want to bring to the attention of Nigerians as we talk about this report by Transparency International in terms of the perception index?
There's a lot of frivolity because Nigeria is experiencing dwindling economy. We're trying to raise revenue. We're trying to ensure that Nigerians enjoy goods and services with this tied to the dividends of democracy. But sadly, in our budget, we're seeing frivolity. We've seen some line items that are very vague. And for us, when you follow the money, you need data. Because when you look at the budget, ideally, this budget is supposed to be tied to specific deliverables. And in most cases, you might see, oh, construction of classroom, the name of the state or local government. But you can't point it to, this communities, maybe it's a ward or a village. You cannot pinpoint it. And then when we issue freedom of information requests, then it becomes vague. We're seeing a lot of frivolity, and we hope that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu would, call his appointees and say, we should do better. We cannot have a multi-year budget.
My apologies, just to butt in. How hard can it be? I'm asking myself, for instance, if I'm a minister and the document's about 2,400 pages, the entire document that is presented to the National Assembly for them to look at. So, but a ministry can be like 10 or 15 or less even 30 pages. How hard can it be for a ministry to sit down with its team in, say, 1 week, we take it page by page and look through? Because some of the things you see in that budget, like, did somebody really go through this? I even saw one ministry, for instance, now we have Ministry for Regional Development, but I still saw the Ministry of Northeast Development still in the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs. Some kind of mistake, and that is given to the president to present before our National Assembly.
I think first, it's even adopting a zero-based budget system, whereby you build the budget from scratch. Because in most cases, what you see is they just do a few edits and resubmit. Now, secondly, when it's presented at the National Assembly during a joint sitting, there's supposed to be budget defense. But in most cases, it's a closed-door meeting. They'll tell media, civil society observers, to go out that they want to have a closed-door session. And in most cases, what happens is they're negotiating. They're negotiating. And let's tell ourselves the truth, because we want Nigeria to be better, not only for us, but for the generation that would come after us. They negotiate behind closed doors. You see lawmakers put their constituency project. You see some ministries that have nothing to do, with some activities. They are constructing road or they're building school. And you wonder, the mandate of this ministry is not supposed to be providing water when we have Ministry of Water Resources, or constructing school when you have Universal Basic Education Board, or even building roads when you have Ministry of Works and Housing. So again, sadly, it's the complicity of that backroom or behind closed doors negotiation that have now compounded into, multi-layers of this frivolity we see. Because what happens is they negotiate and then they allow it to go. And when Mr. President signs the budget, it is law. So what it means is it is mandated that when we generate revenue, we must spend it. So even if they say they are using 2 billion to buy spoon, they will give contract to private sector and buy spoon. Even if it's 2 spoon, they will say they spend 2 billion naira. Sadly, again, when the Auditor General, visit all these MDAs and asks for their account, and he finds gray areas, there's nothing he can do about it, because he's only mandated to audit and submit report, and then nothing happens.
It's unfortunate. As we begin to wind down, let's take it a step further. As you follow the money, I like that name. As a matter of fact, I like to call it over and over. Following the money, everybody should be part of it, if you ask me, because it's our collective, it's our commonwealth we're talking about here. I pay taxes, you pay tax, and everybody pay tax. Or let me not say everybody. A lot of people pay their tax. But at least that collective is part of what we gather to be able to run the country. Implementation is also another part of this whole situation. The same National Assembly or State Houses of Assembly are responsible for the oversight that these things are implemented. And sometimes we see that there's also complicity in some part, and sometimes you see that a project was, monies were earmarked and released, and then project is not done. How do we start naming and shaming so that people will take responsibility?
I think first is even raising awareness, because if citizens are aware and informed, and like you said, we all pay taxes, and in some cases we even forget that even people in rural community pay tax, because when the woman selling akara, she buys ticket from the local authority and she puts a price on her akara based on the ticket she has bought. A lot of us pay VAT, so we either pay direct or indirect tax, and we must hold this government to account. But if you don't have information or knowledge, how do you ask questions? And so you talked about the subnational level and the national level. I know that for some lawmakers at the National Assembly, some senators and House of Rep, they give us information about what they do in their constituency project and the MDA that they're working with. One example is the Memorandum of Understanding we signed with Honorable Bello Erufai, and we're hoping that the National Assembly as an institution will adopt our norm track too. At the state government level, you know, again, because they have immunity, in most cases when you write the Accountant General of the state, who is also a co-financier in the state with the governor, a lot of them respond and say no. But in my own experience, particularly engaging the government of Kogi State, the new government of Kogi State, because they did a one-year anniversary, and I had to go and look at the roads that they've constructed vis-a-vis the amount that was budgeted, and also the quality of what would be launched. And if it's also, again, you know, most cases when you budget and you release, is it what the people actually want? Because again, a lot of time, you see the budget, there's a disconnect between the budget itself, the releases, and then the actualization and the benefit for the people. Because ideally, you're supposed to do a needs assessment before you even undertake a budget. And that's why I advocate for zero-based budgeting. Because if you do a needs assessment, then you're budgeting based on the needs of the people, not the needs of the people who sit comfortably in their office, either at the state capital or here in Abuja.
Hamzat Lawal, we'll continue this conversation. I think the two things you said, needs assessment, which is very, very important, but most importantly, that's zero-based. In the 2026 budget, I think we should start agitating from media and civil society organizations. That's where we start from, because apparently what we see in this budget is clearly copy and paste and a few adjustments. Else we'll not see the repetition we see. Hamzat Lawal is the CEO of Connected Development, as well as a founder of Follow the Money, joining us from our Abuja studios. Thank you so much for coming on the program. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Let's continue following the money.
We will. All right, just before we go, let's tell you, as part of efforts to reposition the All Progressives Party, is to receive 4 members of the House of Representatives who defected from the Labour Party. Addressing journalists in Abuja after a meeting of the National Working Committee of the party and some progressive governors, the chairman of the forum, Mr. Hope Uzodimma, says the giant strides of President Bola Tinubu is attracting members of the opposition into the APC.
Now took advantage of the opportunity presented by that meeting to also receive 4 members of the House of Representatives from Enugu State, from Labour Party to APC. And as I speak, another 9 members of House of Assembly, Enugu State, is also being received by the Minister of Science and Technology in his place. So it goes to show that Nigeria gradually and incrementally are beginning to see the dividends of all the policies of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, our president, and the benefits of the reforms are gradually manifesting. I think Nigeria have confidence in our party, despite all the distractions here and there.
And that's it on the program. Thank you for your time and company and for watching. I'm Jeffrey Uzama. You've been served on Lunchtime Politics. Bye-bye.